Michael, thank you. To an update here at 6, we're learning more tonight about what happens next in the case of a Palestinian man on death row. Robert Roberson has been on death row since 2003 for the murder of his 2-year-old daughter, Nikki. Just days before his third scheduled execution back in October, the Texas Supreme Court issued a stay. In a virtual court hearing today, both the state and defense attorneys talked about the next steps.
That includes a possible evidentiary hearing where the court would decide what experts and witness testimony would be admissible. KLTV 7's Katie Parker picks up the story.
We are eager to get started as soon as possible.
Robert Roberson's defense and the state have agreed to a potential evidentiary hearing regarding Roberson's stay of execution. In 2003, Roberson was convicted for the 2002 murder of his daughter, Nikki. In October of this year, Texas Supreme Court paused Roberson's execution days before he was set to be the first person in the U.S. to be put to death for a conviction tied to shaken baby syndrome. The stay was granted based on Texas's 2013 junk science law, which allows a person convicted of a crime to seek relief if the evidence used against them is no longer credible. The appeals court then sent Roberson's case back to his trial court in East Texas for review. Today, the defense and the state discussed dates for an evidentiary hearing. The judge will potentially hear witness and expert testimony, medical records, and other evidence that will be admissible in court.
We haven't hired experts. The state, it's not my practice, and it's frankly not the state's routine practice to hire experts and the like.
I will clear the decks and be ready whenever the court will allow us time in court.
All parties agreed on June 15, 2026 for the hearing. Katie Parker, KLTV 7 News.
And an additional status hearing was set for the afternoon of February 27th.